After countless teasers, hype-building Twitter posts, and about a year of behind-the-scenes testing by a few select people from the Flat to VR community, the Unreal Engine VR mod is finally available. And if you've been on the internet since its release, I'm sure you've probably seen countless YouTube videos with the word insane in the title. A few claims of 11,000 new VR games available to everyone, and more than a couple of bow down to the saviour of PCVR type statements. Now, I am certainly not an innocent party when it comes to YouTube. I've been known to make the occasional sensationalist statement for a video title. I know how easy it is for creators to get obsessed with the importance of titles and keywords for driving views and appearing in the algorithm. So many times I've wanted to just call a video something like, "Check this out, it's pretty cool," but the little voice in my head tells me I have to include buzzwords that people might be searching. It's a curse, but I understand the hype that's currently circulating online when it comes to this particular topic. Now, in today's video, I just want to chat about the Unreal Engine VR mod. I want to take a step back and cut through the hype, cut through the noise and the exaggerated YouTube titles to really see what this mod is doing and how impactful it really is for the VR community. I've been testing it solidly for days now. My eyes are crusty, they hurt, I've played so many games, but I can safely say that if you remove yourself from the hype train and just spend time using the mod, you'll be left with two undisputable facts. The first fact is this: Praydog should be protected at all costs. What this man has built is phenomenally impressive. A tool that literally injects itself into Unreal Engine 4 or 5 games and brings them to life in gorgeous 3D with scale, potential motion controls, the ability to hide character meshes, change camera angles, and essentially tinker with a game until it feels as close to native VR as is physically possible. That is staggering, and 9 times out of 10, it just works. To paraphrase Todd Howard and Fallout 76, it just works. But unlike Fallout 76, this VR mod is an engineering miracle, and I think its impact will be felt way beyond what it can currently do. But I'll get to that a little bit later. This really is a mod that gets better the more you're willing to learn. The more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. And as an overall achievement in VR modding, it is exceptionally impressive. The second fact is most of the hype that is currently circulating on Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, wherever, is all coming from a genuine place of excitement. The results 99.9% of people are seeing are unlike anything they've ever experienced before, and during my own testing I've been stunned to find that even games without profiles built by someone far smarter than me are looking and running really well after simply applying the vanilla mod without any changes whatsoever. Now, don't get me wrong, my experience has been at its very best when I can use a profile created by someone who has more experience with UEVR than I do. There are currently 100 or so profiles available for download for some of the very best games, and these profiles have given me the best idea of exactly what's possible with this mod. Experiences that feel, dare I say it, close to native VR games, at least in terms of the way they look and the quality of the performance. Motion controls are a different matter altogether, and I'll touch on them a little bit later. Simply put, when you load into a game that has a great profile already available, and you see firsthand the magic of this incredible tool, it's easy to understand why people are making statements that might seem sensationalist. People are excited. This is giving me the quality of experience that I always dreamt I'd get from Vorpex, and it's taking me far less time and far less hassle to get these games running to that standard. So for the next 10 minutes or so, let's talk about the Unreal Engine VR mod. I'm going to talk about my initial experiences of using this incredible tool. What speed bumps have I run into? And why do I genuinely think that this will change VR forever? Okay, let's start with an easy one. How many games actually work with the Unreal Engine VR mod? Now, you might have heard a few people using the buzz statement of 11,000 new VR games available to you right now. Are there actually 11,000 games that work with this mod? Well, technically no, but kind of also yes. If you were to sit and compile a list of every single game, every single demo, every single indie project on itch.io, every single experience that has been built with Unreal Engine 4 or 5, you would have a very long list. There are thousands of these things, thousands of these games. So technically speaking, yes, there are thousands, probably 11,000, probably more than 11,000 games that you could attempt to inject the Unreal Engine VR mod into to create a VR experience. But not all of those games will work. As of recording this video, there is a list of around 700 games that have been tested by the folks at Flat2VR and those who have been working on this project behind the scenes for around a year. Of those games that have been tested, around 550 work well or perfectly, 63 work okay, 29 work poorly, and 23 don't work at all. So just because a game or experience has been built with Unreal Engine 4 or 5, it doesn't mean it's automatically going to work with the Unreal Engine VR mod. There are so many caveats. Some games are built with heavily modified versions of the engine and fundamentally just won't work. Sadly, that's the case for a few big hitters I was hoping to play. Games like Sea of Thieves, Days Gone, Gears 5, LEGO 2K Drive, Crackdown 3, and LEGO Fortnite are not working at the time of recording this video. Who knows exactly why? It could be a myriad of different reasons, anti-cheat software, and again heavily modded versions of the Unreal Engine, but those games won't work. And then you've got the games that currently run poorly, so games like Borderlands 3, Tiny Tina's Wonderland, Outer Worlds, Dark and Darker, Gears Tactics, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor. So the Unreal Engine VR mod isn't this magical catch-all solution that's going to turn every single Unreal 4 or 5 project into perfectly working VR. In a lot of instances, it won't work at all. But the huge, overwhelming majority of games will work. Right now, 550 odd out of around 700 that have been tested are working well or perfectly. The evidence is stacked in the favour of this mod being something very, very impressive, and for the most part, it will work with an Unreal Engine 4 or Unreal Engine 5 game. So, you've picked yourself an Unreal Engine 4 or 5 game, you've downloaded UEVR, and now you're wondering how easy is this thing going to be to use? Well, that all depends on the kind of result you're willing to accept, how much tinkering or digging you're willing to do, and where you ultimately want to take this. To achieve the most basic experience, which would be playing a game you love in VR, in gorgeous 3D, with your touch controllers replicating the inputs of a standard gamepad, the process is painfully simple. Launch Unreal Engine VR. Now, I always launch it in administrative mode. It stops you from running into any issues, and it is recommended for some games. Then, make sure your headset is connected and ready to go. Launch the game that you want to play. Select the game from the Processes drop-down list on the Unreal Engine VR mod. Hit Inject, off you go. That's literally it. The mod handles things like mapping for controllers, so you should be able to use touch controllers for every game. Now, I've been using Quest 3 and currently I've encountered no issues. You'll be able to load in and see your favourite games in gorgeous 3D, and I do mean gorgeous 3D. We're talking close to native stuff in most games once you've selected the right rendering method for the experience, and then you can start playing. It really is that simple if you just want the most basic experience of playing the games you know and love in stunning 3D within your headset with your touch controllers as the input method. Now, let's say you want to get a little fancier and you want to start playing around with different perspectives. Maybe you want to make a third-person game into a first-person game. Well, that takes a little bit more learning. You need to locate the player character pawn, attach the camera to it, hide the skeletal mesh to stop your own face from clipping into the experience, and then you have to tweak it until it feels right. It sounds complicated, but one of the biggest joys of UEVR is how learning this process for one game can essentially be applied to almost every game. I played around with Crash Bandicoot 4 and Lies of P to see if first person was possible, and within both games it took me about 1 minute in total to get an experience that wasn't perfect, but was certainly playable. There are already countless guides on how to change perspectives, how to set up 6DOF motion controls, how to adjust gun positions for FPS games, how to hide elements and skeletal meshes, and we're only a few days into the mod's public launch. If you want to learn how to do something, the basic tools which will show you how are already there, so it falls to you, the user, to decide how deep you'd like to go. For me personally, I've been struggling with creating my own motion controls and adjusting the positions of guns in game, so instead I have been opting to hide the gun or player hand model in some games that don't feel quite right. For me personally, aiming the cursor like some kind of crazy 3D House of the Dead is a perfectly enjoyable experience at this point in time, and once I'm more comfortable and knowledgeable, I'll start to tinker more with the proper motion control options and I'll start playing with those features. As I said at the start of this video, if you put a lot into this mod, you'll get a lot out of it, but you can also have a great experience simply by jumping in at the most basic level, or by piggybacking on the fantastic profiles built and shared by those in the Flat to VR community, which is a Discord you most certainly need to be in to get the very best from this mod experience. Now you might be looking at this video and other videos showing gameplay of the UEVR mod, and you might be thinking, I need to run out and spend £10,000 on a new PC. I need a 4090 as a bare minimum. But that just isn't the case. Yes, a 4090 is nice to have, and yes, it takes a little bit of the pressure off when it comes to picking and choosing games that may or may not run with the UEVR mod. But just like any game that you install on your PC, just like any program that you install on your PC, as long as you know the limits and limitations of your PC setup, there's no harm in trying things, and you can get fantastic results with this mod using a wide range of PC setups and graphics cards. Now, for argument's sake, let's say you've got a GTX 1060 and you're trying to run Red Dead Redemption 2 on ultra settings at 1440p and you want to achieve over 100 frames per second, and then you start to get angry because you're getting nowhere near achieving that. I think it's safe to say in that scenario, you are the problem. Your fundamental understanding of exactly what your PC and its components can achieve is the issue, and the same can be applied to this mod. If you go into this with an older card and you try to run the newest Unreal Engine 5 game on ultra settings, yes, you are probably going to struggle with performance, but you probably would have struggled with performance if you were running the game flat. So if you have an older PC, an older graphics card, don't push for ultra, don't push for high. Be willing to adapt on a game-by-game basis. Use low graphics settings, use medium graphics settings, use things like DLSS and FSR, use the VR resolution slider built into the Unreal Engine VR mod. There are so many tools, countless tools, to help you get great performance if you're willing to use them and accept the limitations of your own system. Now, I am a spoiled brat, so I do have a 4090, which means my experience is slightly anecdotal and is at the top end of things. I'm running these games on Ultra, and I am pushing them to see what's possible. Performance across the board for me has been very impressive. Games like Tony Hawk, Crash Bandicoot, Scorn, Gravel, Abzu and Lies of P have run exceptionally well, whilst visually looking like native VR games with a 3D representation that blows away anything Vorpex ever achieved. I would also say that the results are even sharper and more visually impressive than anything Luke Ross's Real mod has managed in recent years. And Luke Ross's Real mod is something very close to my heart. It's a mod I very much enjoy, and it does give fantastic results. However, there are some games that have shown moments of hitching, slowdown and frame drops. Returnal is mostly perfect, but when I hit a room with tons of enemies, all shooting hundreds of glowing orbs into the air, whilst I blast thousands of glowing rounds of ammunition at them at the same time, I can feel the frame rate slow slightly. It isn't game breaking, it isn't even really distracting, but it is happening, and it's worth noting. Now, I can drop the graphics settings down to solve this for sure, but other games have haven't been as forgiving. RoboCop is a great example of a game that's perfectly playable, but the performance, even on a 4090, is a bit of a struggle at times. I've been running the game on medium graphics settings and have noticed the frame rate dipping when in the midst of intense gunfights. Again, it doesn't hurt the experience too much, and due to RoboCop being a slow-paced game already, it's actually less noticeable, but it is still there. So if you have an older card and you expect perfect performance on newer AAA or realistic looking games, perhaps adjust those expectations somewhat. There are hundreds of games that will work flawlessly for you. I would recommend 40k Bolt Gun and Forgive Me Father 2 to everyone using this mod, but especially people with older systems. If you insist on going into those newer, chunkier, AAA, realistic looking games, then please do utilize all the tools at your disposal. Use DLSS, use FSR, adjust the VR resolution in the Unreal Engine VR overlay, and expect to still see a few dips or lower frame rate moments on those chunkier new games. Now, it hasn't all been sunshine, buttercups, and happiness. There have been a few games that have challenged me, a few games that haven't worked at all, despite others in the community being able to get them running, and a few basic caveats that it's worth being aware of before jumping into using the UEVR mod. So let me just list those caveats off now. Some first-person shooters will display flat, pixelated guns instead of full 3D gun models if you're playing with 6DOF or motion controls. Now, I've experienced this in Warhammer 40k Bolt Gun, Forgive Me Father 2, and Outlast Trials whilst testing the mod over the last few days. Now, it isn't a huge deal breaker for me. I've learned enough about the mod to be able to go into the skeletal meshes and simply hide the gun models if you don't want to see those little flat pixels there. Sometimes it's kind of nice to leave them there as a reference point of what the gun would look like, and I do have a theory about how these mods can change in the future, but I'll save that until the very end. For me, playing a game like Warhammer 40k Bolt Gun in full VR, which looks absolutely stunning, and just having that little pixel gun there, it isn't a huge issue. I'm happy to leave that there for now as a reference point for where my gun is and how I'm aiming at enemies, but if you want to, you can just remove it from your HUD and not have it there and just rely on a cursor. So some games, it's worth knowing right now, do display guns as these little flat pixels instead of full 3D models. Some games will require you to make adjustments mid-game. Now, Returnal comes to mind here. Whenever you start a new run in Returnal, you start with a basic pistol. Now, the alignment on the pistol feels pretty much perfect when using the profile that's currently available, which does support full 6DOF motion controls. It lines up perfectly, the shots line up perfectly, and everything feels pretty much spot on. But then when you pick up a different gun, let's say the carbine for example, things feel slightly misaligned. Now, if that's the kind of thing that would annoy you, you'll have to learn to open up the in-game overlay, make some small adjustments to the gun positioning, save the state, and then go back into playing the game. It isn't a huge deal, and once you've saved the state, that should be persistent across every time you open up that profile. So you shouldn't have to be doing it every time you load into Returnal, but again, it's worth noting there are things you need to learn to get the most out of this mod, and making small adjustments like that mid-game is just one of those things. Something else that many may see as a caveat is if there's no profile currently available, you have to build it yourself. You need to learn these tools. You can't rely on someone else in the community to build a perfectly working profile for you, especially if the game you're wanting to play is an obscure one. Maybe your favorite game is something that not many other people have heard of, and you specifically want to be able to play it in first person with full motion controls. There are guides out there that will help you, but chances are you're going to have to build that yourself, and you can't rely on the mod to do it all for you. It's not magically going to push the game into first person without you doing some legwork to learn how to do that. So if there is no profile, you can either play the waiting game or learn and build it yourself. Okay, I might struggle to explain this next point because I don't fully understand the technicalities of it. I don't fully understand how the motion controls are being created and how they work within this mod. They are very impressive, but for me personally, in a lot of the games I've played, the motion controls feel more like moving a mouse cursor on a screen than actual 6 degrees of freedom motion controls. Now, it hasn't bothered me too much. I am quite lax. I am blown away that I can jump into these games and play with motion controls full stop. And the experience of doing that is enough for me to blow my mind and really impress me, and I'm happy that this mod exists. But I do think that for some people, the motion controls might feel a little bit off. Certainly in some games, not all games, but some games. I've kind of found myself sitting with the controllers down at my lap, and I'm just moving it around slightly to adjust where it's pointing on the screen, rather than lifting my hand and physically pointing to where the enemies are positioned. That's the best way I can explain it. It does feel like gliding a mouse cursor across a screen and pointing. I'm happy with that. I'm fine with that, but it's worth pointing out because I know some people might go hands-on and think, this doesn't feel quite right, and it isn't the case for all games. The motion controls are very impressive. It's incredible that they are even here to start with, but they don't always feel perfect, and they certainly don't feel like native VR motion controls. Okay, one last caveat before I wrap this video up and then jump back into playing more games on the incredible UEVR mod. Now, the final caveat is some games that I've purchased will not work for me at all, despite them working for other members of the community. I've seen footage of these games running in UEVR, but I cannot get them running. Ride 4 is a great example of that. It looks absolutely incredible from all of the Unreal Engine VR footage I've seen. But that wasn't the case for me. I actually needed to refund it as I couldn't get past the main loading screen. Every single time I booted that game up without fail, I was met with a fatal crash and immediate close down of the game. Then with RoboCop, I was also encountering fatal crashes every single time I made it to a new cutscene. Also with RoboCop, I could not aim and use motion controls with the gun model present. For some reason, for me, the gun model was always floating down by my right hand side and never aligned with where my hand actually was, so I needed to turn it off completely. But I've seen other people using the same profile firing away with physical 3D gun models. And it's in these two examples that the trickiest aspect of a mod like this reveals itself. There are a plethora of different PC setups, literally thousands of combinations of hardware components, software setups, brands of devices, and all kinds of other things. Some people will run into issues that others simply can't replicate, and that's not always going to be the fault of the mod. Identifying and understanding that point is key. There are hundreds of people ready to help you in the Discord server and online, as long as you bring the right attitude and some respect to the table. However, it's best to not immediately assume the mod is in the wrong, as there are so many other variables at play in every single situation. So, after this initial period of thorough testing, playing countless games, and learning this incredible new tool, what are my first impressions? The UEVR mod is a stunning achievement for VR. The fact that this thing runs on the range of PCs and setups out there after a year or so of testing by a few dedicated individuals is nothing short of a miracle, and we're only just getting started. In the few days since its release, I've learned a basic level of understanding that will now allow me to modify the way my favourite games run and get them looking incredible in VR. I remember spending hours and hours trying to get particular games to run well in Vorpex. Back when I started this channel with my Will It VR videos, the sheer amount of time I would spend trying to record one single game using that software was often exhausting, as the results needed so much tweaking and tinkering. And even after all was said and done, they never got even close to the results I'm seeing here. In one day, I sat and played around 20 games using Unreal Engine VR, and my experience was overwhelmingly positive. But it's not what the mod can do now that excites me most, it's what this mod will do in the future. As a foundation, this thing is mind-blowing. Dedicated modders and bedroom developers can take the UEVR as a building block and use it to create fully fleshed out VR mods for some of the best Unreal Engine games available to us. For example, 3D models of the guns in 40K Bolt Gun already exist. What would it take for someone to mod those into the game to create a more realistic representation of 6DOF motion controls? Perhaps also attach the HUD elements to a wrist or different location. Do those few things and all of a sudden you're looking at a version of Bolt Gun that can easily rival most native VR boomer shooters in terms of quality, visuals and VR application. The UEVR mod is rightly blowing people's minds, and although they are quite sensationalist, I would say most of the YouTube titles are justified. But it's the future everyone should be excited for. This is just the start. What Praydog and co have gifted the VR modding world will only really be understood after we've had some more time to fully appreciate it.